Welcome back. I am John P. Today, we are going to be talking about a new Seiko watch coming out next month, July 2022, that I believe is going to bring in to Seiko's a lot more watch collectors. What I mean by this is I believe this watch is going to attract so many more watch collectors to the brand. And before we get into it, I'll give you a little foreshadowing here. This is going to be essentially a Seiko version of the Rolex GMT Master, including a variant, a Batman or a Batgirl variant. But I'll get a little bit more into that, as well as my thoughts and opinions on this, why the watch I believe is so cool and interesting, and why I think that we should be able to look past just the fact that it has really serious styling cues and similarities with the GMT Master from Rolex. Before we do that, on the wrist today, figured I would pop on a Seiko watch. It's going to be the Seiko Color Block collaboration with Rowing Blazer, Seiko 5 collaboration. I really think this watch is super cool. I like that it has kind of this interesting colorway. You can see more about this watch on my Instagram, The Real John P. And also do not forget to check out delraywatch.com, where we buy, sell, and trade watches. So the Seiko watch that's coming out that I think is so cool, and I already hear many Seiko collectors and watch collectors getting very excited about this. This is going to be a Seiko 5 watch, so it's going to be from their affordable line for Seiko, and this is going to be the Seiko 5 Sport GMT. Now, why does this matter? Is this just another Seiko sport watch, Seiko 5 du jour coming out? Why are people so excited? Well, first, it does have a variant that is essentially the Batgirl or the Batman. Really the Batgirl because it's on a Jubilee-esque bracelet, kind of like you'd see from a Rolex Batgirl. But also, setting that aside, this watch incorporates a GMT functionality with an extra time zone, by the way, that the GMT Master from Rolex doesn't have. You can keep track of 2 extra time zones because there's an internal bezel, or the rehat, which has an additional time gradient on it. But what makes this watch so interesting is that you're getting a mechanical or an automatic GMT watch at a retail price of just under $500 US. And you can get GMT watches with quartz movements at that price point. And if you hunt around and you shop pre-owned, sure, I'm sure you can find a GMT watch for $500 somewhere. But aside from those scenarios, this is actually a really great value. And I think it really solidifies Seiko as being that kind of value-driven brand that still can deliver in a lot of categories and give you relevant stylings. Now, if you've been a longtime viewer of this channel, you probably know that, or maybe you remember that I've kind of changed up different things I've said about Seiko in the past. Though I think over time, Seiko has really grown on me, right? I hadn't experienced Seiko a whole lot, or the Seiko watches that I have were kind of hit and miss. But as I've put more of these watches on my wrist, including the Seiko 5 that I have here, and I have a Rally Diver version of this watch as well, I've spent more time with Seiko, and it's really just kind of grown on me. And I've been able to appreciate certain qualities about them that I now really understand why the diehard Seiko collectors appreciate it. Now, before we talk about the specs of this particular watch, I do have to mention that I'm not in any way saying here that this watch is going to take away market share from Rolex GMT Master buyers or anything like that. You know, we're talking at watches that are much different in terms of price points, but I do think that they share a lot of similarities here that if you compare them to all watches, we can understand that they're going to be different and appreciate both at different segments and price points in the watch market. So I'm not trying to say this is better in any way. Please don't take it that way. But I think it's cool, and I think it does give us another option and another way where certain collectors can kind of, get their beak wet on something different and interesting without necessarily having to make a much bigger commitment that a watch like that would require you to do so if you weren't set on it entirely. Now, this particular watch is the Seiko 5 Sport GMT. They have 3 versions of it. There's a Batman version, so the black and the blue. There's a black with a slightly less black version of the watch. the bezel actually is black, and then maybe a more gray for the second color. And then you have an orange version of the watch as well, which I already know collectors are probably going to start calling the pumpkin or something like that. But this is going to be your Seiko 5 Sport case essentially, if we're familiar. So it's 42.5 millimeters. It's going to have that 10 bar water resistance, which is 328 feet. I'll interject there. That is quite deep. I can't imagine anyone needing more than that. So yeah, we can compare this to watches at several times or more of the price point, but 328 feet is certainly further than I'll ever go. It has a stainless steel case, which is going to be pretty normal, but also it has that hardlex crystal. So when you look at this, it has this kind of that cyclops that Rolex has with the date. But of course, we're going to be looking at this with that hardlex crystal, which is par for the course with these watches. I personally have really, been experiencing that hardlex in Seiko recently. Yeah, sure, it's not going to be there in terms of a sapphire crystal, but I really don't have anything negative to say about it other than, it's not sapphire, which doesn't mean a lot in and of itself. But also what's probably the most special thing about this watch, if you can set aside the design, which I think many people will be attracted to, is the caliber 4R34 movement that Seiko places in this watch, which is going to be essentially a movement they already have in their other watches, though with that GMT hand functionality that in this particular watch not only gives it the extra time zone because of the bezel, which is rotational on the case, but also there's that internal bezel, or the Rehat as it may be called, which allows for the keeping track of an additional time zone that the Rolex GMT Master, I'll throw it out there, doesn't include. Do you need the extra time zone? That's up for you to decide. It's kind of interesting. I think it makes the watch a little more busy for those that do enjoy that. But rolling on, they do once again have a black version, a blue version, and an orange version. It comes mounted on that 5-row Seiko bracelet that many people really, really like. They like the fact, or they believe that the watch bracelet is very comfortable on the wrist. I haven't seen anyone say that it's not comfortable, so I almost said it was fact here. But if any of you out there have strong opinions on these Seiko bracelets, please leave that in the comments below. I know that I've heard some in the past. But additionally, this watch does come mounted on that bracelet, and it is coming out in July for a price of $485 US. Now, what are my initial reactions to this watch? First, yes, does look like a Rolex GMT Master, but it's a circular watch with GMT functionality that comes in colorways, with the exception of the orange probably, that people really want, right? Most brands have started or at least incorporated some, black version of a GMT watch, very GMT Master reminiscent, or even the Batman or the Batgirl. Most brands have found a way to kind of incorporate that color scheme out there in some way. There's some exceptions, but that seems to be a trend in the industry that I think we just have to accept. And, if we're looking at a functionality like this, and we're talking about watches of great difference in price point, I think it's more than fair, right? I think it's more than fair. It's not like it's Omega coming out with this where they're competing at the exact same price category. This is different. This is certainly a watch from even within inside the Seiko family house to be much more approachable, much more of an entry-level watch from the Seiko 5 brand, where some of these watches are sold, at department stores and things like that. And that is kind of a gateway watch or entry-level watch. So I think it's more than acceptable for this kind of a thing to happen, especially from a company that's not new, right? Seiko is a very long-standing, old company where it's not like they're just popping out on the market with a GMT knockoff. They do have many other very interesting, unique, and cool watches. And let's not even consider Grand Seiko or the Crador line or any of the other very unique watches that they or watch lines that they do offer. But once again, I think the most important thing about this is you're getting that GMT Master functionality at the under $500 price point in a mechanical watch automatic. That's pretty rare. You don't see that all the time. Seiko has other GMT watches, but not at this price point and not as prevalent and modern as we see here. Now, personally, I think this watch is just cool. I think it looks great in the pictures. I can't wait to see it in the flesh. I don't know that I would add one to my collection because I think you have to draw the line somewhere in terms of the watches you put in your collection. I'm pretty happy with my collection currently. But I think if I was shopping around for a watch with a little bit of an interesting functionality, something like a GMT Master, I like the colorways, either the orange or maybe the Batman Batgirl colorway. I think this would be the number one choice, especially at that price point. Seiko, in my opinion, has started to really refine things like their bracelets, like their movements, their dials, that they use that continuous improvement that you see in Japanese lean manufacturing. And I think this is a great watch overall, looking at the specs, looking at the pictures. I can't see anything really that it's missing at this price point to where it wouldn't be probably the number one watch in the price point. At $500, how could you possibly get anything better than this? It's so difficult for me to think about it. Even if you start comparing this watch to watches that are several times the price point, like a $1,500 watch, yeah, it starts getting pretty competitive, and you start, factoring the cost of labor in different parts of the world, and maybe they wouldn't come out on top when you start talking about, are the bezels aligned with the chapter ring? Is the internal bezel going to be aligned with the external rotating bezel perfectly? And that's something that maybe you wouldn't see from Swiss manufacturers all the time or as much, but you don't know because I've seen that on Swiss watches, for that matter, and Swiss micro brands as well. So I think this is so competitive. The price point, in my opinion, is very dangerous for other brands out there that are trying to compete with Seiko. They're obviously taking advantage of economies of scale and just the volume of watches they produce and the way they manufacture. I think this is an amazing watch that will pull in the collectors based on not only the GMT functionality, the quality at the price point, but also the aesthetics. I personally think they look very cool. What do you think? Would love to see and hear your comments and opinions below. Guys, please do not forget to check out delraywatch.com, where we buy, sell, trade watches, and my Instagram, The Real John P. Thanks, guys. You've been chatting with John P.